People always ask me why I took the job. They hear about what happened, and the first question is inevitably the same. Why would anyone work the night shift at Westridge Mall? The answer's simple though, and it's the same reason thousands of people do jobs they shouldn't do. Desperation. I was 23 years old, drowning in student loan debt, and my apartment landlord had just informed me that rent was going up another $200. I'd been working retail during the day, but the pay barely covered groceries. When I saw the posting for a night security guard position at Westridge, offering $22 an hour, I didn't think twice. That was almost double what I was making. The mall itself wasn't particularly impressive. It was one of those aging shopping centers you see in suburban areas, built in the 80s and never quite modernized. 3 stories tall, maybe 200 stores if you counted the smaller kiosks. It had seen better days. Some storefronts were boarded up, their windows covered with gray plywood. Others still operated, but their lights would go out by closing time, leaving only the skeletal framework of the mall visible from the outside. During the day, it hosted the usual crowds of teenagers, elderly people walking for exercise, and desperate shoppers hunting for sales. But at night, when the security gates came down and the main entrance locked, Westridge became something else entirely. It became a labyrinth. I showed up for my first shift on a Tuesday evening at 11 o'clock. The mall had officially closed at 9, and by the time I arrived, it was eerily quiet. My supervisor was a woman named Patricia, a stern-looking 50-something with gray-streaked hair and a permanent expression of mild disappointment. She walked me through the security office, a small room packed with television monitors displaying various angles throughout the mall. The screens showed empty corridors, darkened storefronts, and fountain areas with their water features shut off. Patricia handed me a laminated sheet of paper. "These are the rules," she said matter-of-factly, as if she weren't about to hand me something that would eventually make my skin crawl. "You need to memorize them before your second shift. They're mandatory." I looked at the sheet, my eyes scanning the list. There were 7 rules, printed in bold black text on white paper. Some of them seemed straightforward. Others didn't make much sense. Rule 1. Always stay in the main corridor. Never enter the back hallways after midnight. Rule 2. If you hear knocking on the service exits, do not open them under any circumstances. Rule 3. Do not stop to look at your reflection in any storefront windows for more than 5 seconds. Rule 4. The bathrooms are off limits after 1 in the morning. Use them before that time. Rule 5. If the fountain in the central atrium starts flowing water without being turned on, leave that section of the mall immediately. Rule 6. Never interact with anyone you encounter in the mall. Acknowledge them with a nod, but do not make conversation. And Rule 7, which Patricia emphasized by tapping the paper with her index finger. If you see something in the mall that wasn't there when you arrived, or if something disappears that was definitely there before, report it immediately to me via radio. Do not investigate. I remember laughing nervously when I finished reading. "These are pretty specific," I said, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Has something happened here?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "Just follow the rules and you'll be fine. Don't follow them and you'll have a very unpleasant night." The last security guard we had didn't take them seriously. He only lasted 2 shifts. "What happened to him?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "He decided that the rules didn't apply to him, that they were just protocols put in place by a paranoid management team. He ignored Rule 4 and went to the bathroom at 2 in the morning. When he came out, he claimed he saw something in one of the mirrors. He refused to talk about it, just quit on the spot and walked out without collecting his paycheck. That was about 6 months ago. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. I needed this job. Whatever had happened to the previous guard was probably just a story that had been exaggerated over time. Maybe he'd seen a raccoon or something equally mundane and let his imagination run away with him. Patricia showed me the rest of the security office, pointing out the emergency procedures, the locations of the fire exits, and the radio system I'd used to check in with her periodically throughout the night. She explained that she'd be in the office during my shift, watching the monitors from her desk at home through a secure live stream. If anything seemed out of the ordinary, I was to radio her immediately. "How long have you worked here?" I asked as she was showing me toward the door. 8 years, she said. "And in those 8 years, I've seen 3 different night guards. You're the 4th. I'm hoping you last longer than the others." That comment stuck with me as I watched her leave through the security exit. 3 different guards in 8 years. That meant the average tenure was around 2.5 years. But that guard she'd mentioned, the one who quit after 2 shifts, suggested that not all departures were planned retirements. After Patricia left, I was alone in the mall for the first time. The silence was profound, almost oppressive. I'd worked in retail before, and I knew what a shopping mall felt like during the day. It was chaotic, filled with competing soundtracks from different stores, the murmur of crowds, the occasional child crying or couple arguing. But at night, with everything closed and locked down, it was like a completely different place. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a pale, sickly hue. The escalators stood frozen, their steps forming unnatural lines across the mall's landscape. The stores, with their lights off and gates pulled down, looked like tombs. I began my rounds, walking through the main corridor as instructed. The mall was organized in a logical cross pattern, with the central atrium in the middle where the fountain stood. 2 major corridors ran perpendicular to each other, creating 4 separate sections of the mall. The main stores anchored each end, a department store to the north, another to the south, a supermarket to the east, and a movie theater to the west. The corridors connecting them were lined with smaller shops. As I walked, I tried to settle my nerves by making a mental checklist of everything Patricia had said. Stay in the main corridor. Check. Don't interact with anyone. Understood. Don't look in mirrors for more than 5 seconds. That was an odd one, but okay. Don't use the bathrooms after 1 in the morning. I could manage that. Don't enter the back hallways after midnight. I had no reason to anyway. The hours ticked by slowly. I made my rounds every 30 minutes, checking the security gates, looking for signs of break-ins or vandalism, and making sure all the emergency exits were still secured. Nothing unusual happened in those first few hours. The mall remained silent and empty. I sat in the security office between rounds, watching the monitors and occasionally scrolling through my phone. At one point, I decided to explore some of the storefronts, peering through the gates at the merchandise inside. A clothing store, a phone retailer, a shoe shop, all of it perfectly ordinary. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I felt the first stirring of something unusual. It wasn't anything I could point to specifically. It was more of a feeling, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to have taken on a different quality. It was colder, for one thing. When I'd arrived, the mall had been pleasantly cool from the air conditioning. But now, even in my jacket, I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. That didn't make sense. The climate control should have maintained a consistent temperature. I checked my watch. It was exactly 2 o'clock. I decided to make a round anyway, walking through the corridors and checking the perimeter. As I passed through the central atrium, I noticed that the fountain, which had been completely still and dark when I arrived, now had a few droplets of water on its edge. That was strange. The fountain wasn't supposed to be on. No one had activated it, and I definitely would have remembered if I had touched it. I thought about Rule 5. If the fountain starts flowing water without being turned on, leave that section immediately. But it wasn't flowing. There were just a few drops. Maybe it had a leak? Maybe the pipes beneath were acting up? I decided not to worry about it and continued my rounds. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't deny that something was off. The temperature had dropped even further, to the point where my breath was coming in visible plumes. The silence, which had been merely unsettling at midnight, had transformed into something almost suffocating. It pressed against my ears like a physical presence. I radioed Patricia to check in, as I was supposed to do every hour. "Everything normal?" Her voice crackled through the small speaker clipped to my belt. "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied. "Just doing my rounds." There was a pause before she responded. "Good. Stay in the main areas. Don't deviate." The way she emphasized that last instruction made me wonder what exactly she thought might happen if I did deviate. But I didn't ask. I was still trying to convince myself that the rules were just standard security protocol, nothing more. I made my way back toward the security office, taking the western corridor that passed the movie theater. As I walked, I noticed something that made my steps slow. The lights in one of the storefronts were on. I was certain they hadn't been on when I passed through earlier. It was a clothing boutique called Elegance, and its interior was fully illuminated, casting a warm glow into the corridor. The mannequins inside were positioned on display platforms, dressed in evening wear. Their blank faces stared out at me through the gate. I approached the storefront slowly, drawn by a combination of curiosity and dread. According to the rules, I wasn't supposed to interact with anything unusual. I was supposed to report it, but surely just looking at it wasn't breaking any rules. I moved closer to the gate, peering through the metal bars at the interior. The store looked exactly as it must have looked during business hours, meticulously arranged and organized. Clothing hung on racks in perfect rows. Shoes were displayed on shelves. The cash register sat empty on the counter. Everything was pristine, but the lights were definitely on, and I hadn't seen anyone open the store. This definitely qualified as something disappearing or appearing without explanation. I reached for my radio to call Patricia, but something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a strange reluctance. I couldn't explain it. It was like some part of my brain was warning me not to draw attention to this. "Just leave it alone," that voice suggested. "Pretend you didn't see it. Move on with your night." I listened to that voice and kept walking. I didn't report it to Patricia. I didn't investigate further. I simply continued my rounds as if nothing had happened. At 3:30, I was back in the security office when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, but distinct. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere toward the back of the mall, near the service areas. I looked at the monitors, scanning each one to see if anyone had somehow gotten inside. All the screens showed empty corridors and closed storefronts. No one was visible anywhere. The knock came again, a deliberate rapping sound. This time it seemed to be coming from a different location. Then again, from yet another direction. Rule 2 surfaced in my mind. If you hear knocking on the service exits, do not open them under any circumstances. These weren't service exits being knocked on, as far as I could tell. But something about the rule felt relevant anyway. The knocking was systematic, almost rhythmic. Knock, pause, knock from a different location, pause. Like something was working its way through the mall, testing each exit, each door, each potential entry point. I stood up from my desk and walked to one of the security monitors, increasing the volume on the audio feed. The knocking was faint, but unmistakable. It continued for about 5 minutes and then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the knocking had been. I called Patricia again. This time, I did report something. I heard knocking sounds coming from the service areas. I'm not sure where exactly it was coming from, but it was deliberate, rhythmic. There was a longer pause before Patricia responded. "You didn't open any doors, did you?" "No, of course not." "Good. It's probably just the building settling or pipes contracting in the cold. These old malls do strange things when the outside temperature drops. But it wasn't that cold outside. I'd checked the weather before arriving for my shift. It was 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't cold enough to cause pipes to knock in a temperature-controlled environment like a shopping mall." "Right," I said anyway. "Buildings settling." "Continue your rounds. Keep everything locked up tight," Patricia instructed. And then she signed off. Around 4 in the morning, I took a mandatory break and sat in the security office, nursing a cup of coffee I'd made in the small break room attached to the office. I was exhausted, not because of any physical exertion, but because of the constant state of alert I'd maintained all night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold malevolent intent. I was staring at one of the monitors, the one showing the central atrium and the fountain, when I noticed something that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. The fountain was no longer dormant. Water was flowing from it, a steady stream pouring into the basin below. The lights around the fountain, which should have been off, were illuminated with a soft blue glow. I remembered Rule 5. If the fountain starts flowing without being turned on, leave that section immediately. I was still in the security office, which was technically adjacent to the atrium, but not directly in it. But the spirit of the rule seemed clear. Something was wrong with the fountain. I should stay away from it. I radioed Patricia, and this time I didn't hedge or minimize what I was seeing. The fountain in the central atrium is running. I didn't turn it on, and according to the rules I was given, I'm supposed to leave that section if it starts running without being activated. Patricia was silent for so long that I thought the radio connection had dropped. Then she said, "Are you sure it wasn't on before?" "Positive. I've been here all night. It was completely off when I arrived. It was just dry, with no water flowing at all." Another pause. "Okay, leave that section. Don't go near the atrium. Confine your rounds to the eastern and western corridors. I'm going to make some calls. Just stay safe and keep checking in with me every 30 minutes. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't normal. Whatever was happening, Patricia had clearly encountered it before, and she was taking it seriously. I abandoned my coffee and stood up, deciding to continue my rounds in the eastern corridor. As I left the security office and made my way toward the eastern section of the mall, I couldn't help but think about what the previous security guard must have experienced. He'd lasted 2 shifts. What could have happened in 2 shifts that was bad enough to make him just walk away? As I passed through the connecting corridor between the central atrium and the eastern section, I had to walk past one of the storefronts. It was a bookstore, and as I glanced at its windows, I caught my reflection in the glass. I was about to move on when something made me stop. I looked at my reflection more carefully, and I felt my stomach drop. For just a fraction of a second, the reflection didn't match my movements. My reflection had turned its head, looking directly at me, its expression blank and unnatural. Then it corrected itself, and I was seeing my normal reflection again, mirroring my actual movements. Rule 3 came flooding back. Do not stop to look at your reflection in any storefront window for more than 5 seconds. I had been looking for maybe 3 seconds, but I'd seen enough. I hurried away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. That had to be a trick of the light. Tired eyes, sleep deprivation causing visual hallucinations. There was no way my reflection had actually moved independently. That was impossible. But you know what the scariest thing was? I already knew, on some fundamental level, that the rules weren't arbitrary guidelines. They were warnings. They were specifically crafted instructions, designed to keep me from experiencing whatever was really happening in this mall when the sun went down. At 5 o'clock, as dawn began to lighten the sky outside the mall's windows, I received a radio call from Patricia. "You can start wrapping up your rounds. The day shift manager will be here in an hour to relieve you. You did good work tonight." I realized I'd survived my first full shift, but as I handed over to the day manager and walked out into the morning sunlight, I already knew I'd be back the next night. The money was too good, and I was already becoming dangerously curious about what exactly this mall really was and what happened in the darkness. My second night at Westridge was different from the start. I could feel it the moment I arrived. The air seemed heavier somehow, like the entire building was holding its breath. Patricia met me in the security office, and she looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved with a deliberate slowness, as if every action required conscious thought. I need you to be extremely careful tonight, she said without preamble. Something is escalating. I've reviewed the footage from your first shift, and there are some things I need to discuss with you. My stomach tightened. What things? The fountain wasn't just running. When I zoomed in on the footage, the water was flowing upward, defying gravity. It was pouring into the basin from below, rising up like it was being pushed by something underneath. The system would have to be running at reverse pressure to do that, and the fountain system isn't even capable of that kind of operation. I didn't know what to say to that. The image in my head was disturbing. Water flowing upward in a fountain that shouldn't have been running at all. Patricia continued, "There's something else. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, there's a section of the mall where every camera glitches at the same time. Exactly 47 seconds. All the monitors in the West Corridor go to static simultaneously. Every night for the past 3 weeks. Every night at precisely 3:17 in the morning." "What's in the West Corridor?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It was the movie theater and the clothing boutique I'd seen lit up during my first night. "That's what we need to find out. But carefully, don't go investigating, just observe. If you see anyone or anything unusual in that corridor, report it immediately." I nodded, but I was already uneasy. There was something she wasn't telling me. I could see it, in the way she avoided direct eye contact, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she handed me the rules sheet again. "Have you ever seen anything?" I asked her directly. "During your shifts?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Once," she finally said. "About a year ago, I came in early to do some filing while the night guard was on duty. I was in the back office, and something compelled me to check the monitors. The West Corridor was completely dark, even though the lights should have been on. And there was something standing in front of the movie theater doors. It looked like a person at first, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long. The head was tilted at an angle that no neck should have allowed. When I looked away and looked back, it was gone." A chill ran through me. "What was it?" "I don't know, and I don't want to know. All I know is that whatever is in this mall, it follows the same patterns. It appears during the camera glitches. It has never approached anyone who followed the rules, and it has never done anything overtly violent. But the previous guards, the ones who broke rules, something about them changed. They didn't come back." Patricia left me with those cheerful thoughts and headed home. My second night proceeded much like the first, except now I was hyper-aware of the time. At 3 in the morning, I positioned myself in the security office, watching the monitors like a hawk. I was looking specifically at the West Corridor feeds, waiting for the glitch Patricia had mentioned. At exactly 3:17, every monitor went to static, all of them simultaneously. 47 seconds of complete visual nothing. I counted every single second, my heart pounding in my ears. When the monitors flickered back to life, the West Corridor was illuminated once again, and there was nothing unusual visible in any of the footage. But I knew something had been there. Something that moved in that invisible window where the cameras couldn't see. Over the next week, I returned to Westridge every night. Each shift brought new peculiarities. On my third night, I encountered Rule 6. I was walking through the southern corridor when I heard footsteps ahead of me. I rounded a corner and came face to face with another person. It was a woman, probably in her 60s, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in years. Her hair was matted, and her skin had an unhealthy gray pallor. She was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I remembered the rule: acknowledge them with a nod, but do not make conversation. I nodded curtly and tried to move past her. "Wait," she said, her voice like gravel grinding beneath the wheels of a car. "Don't you want to know what this place is?" I kept walking, refusing to answer. "It's a feeding ground," she continued, following me, "for things that exist between the stores, in the spaces we're not supposed to look. They collect us, one by one, and the mall keeps growing, Even though no new construction is happening, it just expands inward. I walked faster, my pace becoming almost a jog. "You'll stay," she called after me. "They always keep the smart ones, the ones who follow the rules. You're too useful to them alive." I made it back to the security office and locked the door, my hands shaking. I radioed Patricia immediately. I encountered someone in the mall, a woman. She spoke to me and seemed to know things about this place. "Did you engage in conversation?" Patricia asked sharply. "No, I followed the rules. I acknowledged her and moved on." "Good. That's very good. If you encounter her again, do the same thing. Under no circumstances engage in dialogue with anyone you see. They're not people anymore. They're part of the mall now, fragments of consciousness that it's accumulated over the years." "What do you mean, not people anymore?" "I mean exactly what I said. People who stayed too long, broke the rules, or sometimes just had the misfortune of wandering into Westridge at the wrong time. The mall absorbs them, uses them. We don't know if they're still conscious in some way, or if they're just echoes of what they were." I sat in the security office for the rest of my shift, trying to process what Patricia had just told me. The woman I'd seen hadn't seemed like an echo or a fragment. She'd seemed aware, present, intentional. But then again, maybe that's what made it worse. By my fifth night, the rules began to fail. Rule 4 specifically. The bathrooms became unusable. The water coming from the taps turned black. Not a metaphorical darkness, but an actual physical black liquid that smelled of iron and something organic. When I reported it, Patricia told me to simply use the facilities in the back office of the security area. "The bathrooms are becoming liminal spaces," she explained. "They're transitioning. The mall is preparing something." "Preparing what?" I demanded. "I don't know, but I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've never seen it behave this aggressively before. We might need to increase security measures. I'm considering hiring another night guard to have 2 people on the premises at all times." The thought of having another person in the mall with me was somehow more terrifying than being alone. At least when I was alone, I only had to worry about myself. Another person would mean having to look after someone, and based on what I'd seen, I wasn't sure I could protect anyone from what dwelled in Westridge. On my 7th night, Patricia made an announcement that chilled me to my core. "The mall is closing," she said over the radio, effective immediately. "The corporate office has decided to shut down Westridge for renovations." But here's the strange part. There were no renovations planned. No emergency maintenance was needed. The decision came from corporate with no explanation, just a directive to close the mall and keep a security presence on the premises around the clock. "They've doubled your pay." I looked at the words on the contract they'd emailed me. $22 an hour had become $44 an hour. They wanted me to work full-time security at a closed shopping mall, around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Why would they do that? I asked Patricia. Because they know what this place is, and they're trying to contain it. The mall is growing restless now that it's closed. It doesn't have the constant influx of new people to absorb anymore. With the mall shut down, whatever is happening here is accelerating. They need constant monitoring, constant presence. I realized then that I was trapped. Not physically, but practically. The money was too good. I had nearly enough saved up to move out of my apartment now, to pay off some of my student loans. And if I quit, would they find someone else? Would they find someone naive enough and desperate enough to take this job? Someone who didn't understand what they were getting into? So I agreed. I signed the contract. I became a full-time employee at a place that shouldn't exist, guarding something that shouldn't be real. 3 months into my full-time position at Westridge, I understood the rules completely. Not because anyone explained them to me, but because I'd witnessed what happened when people broke them. The woman in the southern corridor appeared regularly now, always trying to get me to engage in conversation. I never did. The bathroom mirrors showed distorted reflections that didn't match my movements. I avoided looking. The fountain in the central atrium ran perpetually now, its water flowing in impossible spirals. I kept my distance. But there was something else happening that Patricia hadn't warned me about. The mall was changing me. It started small. I'd find myself walking corridors I didn't remember entering. I'd lose hours without realizing it. Time moved differently in Westridge. A night could feel like days, or days could compress into moments. My apartment, which I'd finally been able to afford after months of work, felt less real than the mall. When I left at dawn, the outside world seemed like the dream. When I returned at dusk, Westridge felt like home. Patricia noticed the changes during one of our briefings. "You're adapting too well," she said, studying my face. "It usually takes guards longer to accept what's happening here. Most of them fight it. You seem to be embracing it." "Maybe I'm just practical," I answered. "Fighting it won't change anything. The mall is what it is. I'm just trying to survive." But that wasn't entirely true. I was becoming something else. I could feel it happening at a cellular level, like the mall was slowly rewriting who I was. I'd catch glimpses of my reflection and barely recognize myself. My eyes seemed darker. My movements had become more fluid, more economical. I didn't need as much sleep anymore. Food had started tasting wrong, like it belonged to a world I was rapidly leaving behind. On what I thought would be an ordinary night, I received a summons. Patricia called me into the security office and told me that corporate wanted to meet with me. Not in person, but via video call. When the screen flickered to life, I was face to face with a man in an expensive suit, sitting in an office that looked sterile and corporate in every way. "You're the new full-time guard," he said, without introduction. His voice was clipped and professional. "How are you adapting?" "Fine," I said. "Patricia tells me you're the first one to actually last more than a few weeks. That's impressive. Do you know why the previous guards failed?" I shook my head. "They tried to maintain their humanity, their connection to the outside world. But Westridge doesn't allow that. It's not a place that tolerates partial commitment. Either you accept what it is, or it breaks you." He leaned forward. "I think you understand that now." "What is this place?" I asked directly. The man smiled. "Westridge is a facility, a containment unit, if you will. The structure you see is just the surface. Beneath it, in spaces that don't quite align with normal geometry, there are things, entities. Call them gods, demons, or interdimensional beings. The terminology doesn't really matter. What matters is that they exist and they have an appetite. For what? Human consciousness, human essence. The rules exist to regulate that appetite. The fountain, the camera glitches, the reflections that don't match. Those are all feeding mechanisms. The mall extracts a small amount from every person who enters it. Tourists, shoppers, employees, tiny incremental amounts that they never notice. It's been working beautifully for 43 years. I felt my stomach drop. And the people who disappear, the ones who break the rules, those are accidents, miscalculations. When someone breaks a rule, they expose themselves fully to the entities. The entities take more than they should, and the person can't survive the extraction. But those cases are rare. Most people simply follow the rules and leave, none the wiser. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not leaving. We've decided to offer you a permanent position. You'll become a caretaker of Westridge. You'll tend to it, maintain it, ensure that the rules are followed. In exchange, you'll be sustained. You won't age, you won't need much of anything. You'll become part of the mall itself, just like the woman you've encountered, just like the others who agreed to this arrangement. I thought of the gray-skinned woman, the fragmented consciousness that seemed to be all that remained of whoever she'd been. I thought of the other presences I'd sensed in the mall. The shadows that moved between the storefronts. The whispers that came through the security speakers when no one was speaking. "And if I refuse?" I asked. The man's smile didn't waver. "You won't refuse, because you already know the truth. You've already changed. You can feel it happening. In another few weeks, the transformation will be complete. You'll be ours, whether you agree or not. The only choice you have now is whether to accept it gracefully or resist and suffer through the process. The screen went dark. I stood in the security office, Patricia's presence behind me, heavy with sympathy. "How long?" I asked. "You have about 2 weeks left as you are now," she said quietly. "After that, the change becomes irreversible. If you want to leave, you need to do it soon. Take the money you've saved and disappear. Find a new city. Start over." "But you'll stay," I said. It wasn't a question. "I've already changed. I made my peace with it a long time ago. But you're not me. You might still have a chance." I left Westridge that night and didn't go back for 3 days. I tried to reintegrate with the normal world. I went to restaurants, walked through parks, sat in my apartment, and watched television. But nothing felt right. Everything tasted wrong. The sunlight hurt my eyes. Other people seemed distant, almost translucent. I could see through them, see the small lights of consciousness that lived inside them, waiting to be extracted. On the 4th night, I returned to Westridge voluntarily. I walked through the security gate and made my way to the central atrium. The fountain was waiting for me, its impossible water flowing in patterns that made perfect sense. I stood before it and understood, finally, what it meant to belong to something larger than yourself. The rules were no longer rules. They were simply the natural order of things. I would follow them because I chose to, because following them was the easiest path. The woman in the southern corridor walked up to me and smiled. A real smile, with genuine affection. I smiled back. For the first time since arriving at Westridge, I spoke to her. "Welcome home," she said, and I finally understood. I had never been searching for an escape. I had been searching for this. A place where the rules made sense, where my existence had purpose, where I belonged completely. Patricia found me in the security office the next morning. She didn't look surprised. She simply nodded, as if confirming something she'd already known. "You're going to be good at this," she said. And she was right. The mall had chosen me well. The money had been the bait, but the trap was so much more elegant than that. It had offered me belonging, and that was something I'd been searching for my entire life. Now, years later, I still work at Westridge. I've learned to appreciate the beauty of its architecture, the way it exists between spaces, the rhythm of the rules that govern it. New guards come and go. Some resist, some break. Some, like me, eventually realize that resistance is pointless. The mall always gets what it wants in the end. And if you ever find yourself in a shopping mall late at night, when the stores are closing and the crowds are thinning, pay attention to the rules. Because Westridge isn't the only one. They're everywhere, waiting in the spaces we walk through every day, ready to make us an offer we can't refuse.